Sometimes a single line of scripture holds far more than it seems willing to reveal. 1 Chronicles 4 verses 42 and 43. Two short verses. A brief expedition, a strike, a settlement. And yet within these lines, memory, identity, geography, and survival are all at work, quietly shaping what the chronicler wants us to see. Here is the text. And from them, of the sons of Simeon, 50 men went to Mount Seir, Baalayahu, Beadyahu, Birayahu, and Ziza, the sons of Yishi. These were their chiefs. And they struck down the remnant who had escaped of Amalek, and they dwelt there to this very day. For many, these words carry weight long before we begin. The name Amalek alone pulls an old tension into the room. Centuries of conflict, cycles of reprisal, the most difficult questions about judgment and survival. Tradition has wrestled here for generations. Is this a story of eradication, of justice reclaimed, of ancient violence preserved for theological memory? Each answer touches something real, and yet the text itself resists being reduced to any single reading. The chronicler writes with astonishing economy. Names flash by, numbers are offered without comment, places are evoked without description, and then the whole thing closes with that haunting seal to this very day. These lines are compact, but they are not simple. Their force lies in how the pieces hold together. The people, the place, the leaders, the remnant, the strike, the settlement. Meaning emerges only when we follow those movements and listen for the patterns inside them. That is what we are going to do. We are going to let the story open slowly, tracing how identity, number, leadership, and land interlock in the first verse, and then how the second verse confronts the problem of Amalek, the persistence of a cycle that refuses to close, before arriving at the mystery of dwelling there and what it means for something to endure to this very day. This isn't a story about conquest alone. It is about recurrence, disruption, and transformation. And if we listen carefully, we begin to hear how a single spare sentence preserves the memory of a moment where an old pattern was met and somehow changed. We'll begin with verse 42, so let's hear again the kernel it begins with. From the sons of Simeon, 50 men went to Mount Seir. Our first triad lives inside that simple line. Simeon 50 Seir. Taken as a list, it sounds like staffing notes on a clipboard. Spoken as a story, it becomes a fitted movement. Simeon's very name carries the sense of attentive hearing, and that posture matters. This is not any tribe anywhere doing anything. This is a people attuned to what lies at their frontier. Their southland adjacency makes Seir, rugged, Edomite, highland, more than a dot on a map. It is the right kind of hard place for them, the kind of landscape that calls for discernment rather than spectacle. Once the land is named, the number makes sense. 50 is not bombast, it is a detachment sized for terrain that punishes the unwieldy. The mountain chooses the method. A large levy would be noisy and slow, a tiny band would be swallowed by the ridges. 50 can travel, scout, and hold. In this way, the place shapes the company without a word of tactics in the text. And if you lift Simeon out of the line, if you remove the people's identity and their listening posture, the number floats without meaning. Why 50? Why here? The verse's economy is intentional. Who they are points to where they go. Where they go determines how many they take. What looks like a bare itinerary is actually the architecture of a mission. This is how the story begins to demystify itself. Not by denying the severity that follows, but by revealing that the opening move is neither random nor reckless. A people who listen step toward a hard place with a measured team. Identity frames the theater. The theater calibrates the force. Only then are we ready to hear what the chief's names add to that frame, and how the action that follows turns a repeating wound into a settled there. Let us move forward in the verse because just after the 50 are counted, and the mountain named, the chronicler pauses to list 4 leaders. Baalayahu, Beadyahu, Birayahu, and Ziza, the sons of Yishi. These were their chiefs. On the surface, it sounds like bookkeeping, just a roster to prove someone kept records. But the names themselves are doing something the narrative never pauses to explain. They are small, poetic summaries of identity, authority, and belonging. And they make this expedition far more than a random skirmish party. We begin with Baalayahu, Beadyahu, and Birayahu. 3 names, 3 facets of leadership, each tethered to Yahweh, but carrying a different emphasis. Baalayahu means Yahweh is Lord or Yahweh is Master. In that one name, you hear command, responsibility, the weight of authority. Beadyahu means Yahweh is my support or on behalf of Yahweh. That's advocacy and intercession, the voice that stands between people and purpose. Birayahu comes from the root for shepherding. Yahweh is my shepherd. Here is care, provision, steady attention, authority, advocacy, care. The names themselves form a kind of leadership chord. No single tone dominates and none stands alone. If you take only command without support, the structure collapses under its own weight. If you care without leading, you drift. If you advocate without shepherding, the flock scatters even as the voice speaks on their behalf. These men, standing together, embody a model of headship that harmonizes what is often fragmented. And here the chronicler gives us something subtle. Before we know how the Amalekites fall or how the Simeonites settle, we are given a picture of leadership aligned with something larger than itself. These chiefs are not heroes operating on instinct or charisma. Their very names claim derivative authority. They lead because they are led. If we skip this layer, we risk mishearing the story entirely. The chronicler isn't glorifying sheer strength or victory. He is showing us how a campaign like this is framed by dependence. A people who listen, the sons of Simeon, walk into rugged Seir under leaders whose identity, even at the level of naming, says, not by us, but through us. That is why the chiefs matter before the strike is ever described. But there is a fourth name in the list, Ziza. And you know, Ziza doesn't fit, at least not neatly. His name doesn't invoke Yahweh at all. It probably comes from a root meaning to move, to shimmer, or to flourish, hinting at vitality and adaptability. This contrast invites us to slow down because the chronicler could have left him unnamed. Why include him here among the Yahoo heads? The key comes in the phrase that follows, the sons of Yishi. Yishi's name means my salvation. This isn't a detached band of four unrelated individuals. They are brothers, or at least kin within one household. Their identity as sons of Yishi binds the leadership set together, weaving Ziza's distinctive vitality into the same lineage as the three who bear the divine name. And suddenly this isn't just a leadership list, it's a convergence. The theophoric cluster of chiefs, bound by spiritual dependence, stands alongside Ziza's energy, both contained under the shelter of Yishi's house and name. Within one family, you see stability and unpredictability coexisting, those who root authority in God's sovereignty, and the one who represents movement, adaptability, perhaps even a creative edge. In the broader frame of the expedition, this matters deeply. The Simeonites send 50 men into a rugged frontier. They need measured force, yes, but also measured leadership. The steadying shepherds, the advocating voice, the commanding hand, and the one who carries the capacity to respond fluidly when the terrain shifts. The House of Yishai provides all of it, an ecosystem of leadership compacted into four names. Verse 42 draws all these threads together. Balayahu, Beadyahu, Birayahu, and Ziza, the sons of Yishi. These were their chiefs. It is here in this closing line of the first sentence that the chronicler shows us the shape of the expedition fully formed. We've been given the Simeonite identity, the measured company of 50, the chosen theater of Mount Seir, and the four leaders of Yishi's house. Now, by calling them their chiefs, the chronicler ties the pieces into a single, integrated whole. Think of how the scene now reads when we hear the opening line afresh. From the sons of Simeon, 50 men went to Mount Seir, Balayahu, Beadyahu, Birayahu, and Ziza, the sons of Yishi. These were their chiefs. What first sounded like fragments, tribe, number, place, names, now resolves into coherence. The tribe frames the mission. The mountain sets its scale. The household gives it living leadership. And those leaders, by name and lineage, anchor the company's purpose and authority. It matters that the chronicler does not tell us a group of Simeonites went to Seir. He numbers them, names them, roots them. He insists that we see this as a people acting deliberately, under structure, in response to a situation that demanded precision rather than chaos. The chiefs are not titles dropped on top of a faceless band. They emerge naturally from the interplay of everything we've seen so far. The attentive sons of Simeon, true to their name, move toward their southern frontier in a manner fitted to who they are and where they are called to act. The measured size of the force matches the demands of the land. The leaders' names, full of meaning, declare dependence and purpose before the mission even begins. And by tying the chiefs back to Yishi's house, the chronicler shows us that this leadership is not accidental. It is inherited, rooted, recognized. When all these elements come together, the first verse stops being a list and becomes a portrait. We see a listening people attuned to their geography, acting with deliberation under leaders whose very names encode their posture toward God and one another. It is only with that full picture in view that we're prepared for what happens next. Because when the Simeonites strike Amalek's remnant in the following verse, it is not a nameless blow from an anonymous force. It is the action of a people who have brought their identity, their house, their balance of leadership, and their measured strength into a single, integrated response. The meaning of what follows depends on this foundation. This is not chaos meeting chaos, but order confronting disorder. A chosen people acting with intention in a moment where the past, the land, and the future converge. Verse 43 shifts tone and pace. Where the first sentence gave us tribe, number, place, and names, this second one drives forward without pause. And they struck down the remnant who had escaped of Amalek, and they dwelt there to this very day. For many readers, the meaning seems simple: an attack, a fall, a settlement. But this is precisely why the verse resists quick reading. The chronicler's phrasing is too deliberate, too compressed, to sustain the assumption that this is simply another link in an endless chain of hostility. He could have said, and they struck the remnant, and been done with it, but he did not. He specifies the remnant who had escaped of Amalek. The name is carried forward carefully, almost ceremonially. It forces us to begin here not with the strike, but with the meaning of the name itself. Amalek, for the chronicler, is not just a people, nor merely a nation to be resisted or destroyed. The name operates as a vessel, preserving a pattern older than this story and larger than this skirmish. The letters themselves speak, and when we listen to them, we find not a simple symbol of chaos, but a cycle, a recurring tension through which Israel has long been tested. We begin with Ayin, the eye. It names perception, awareness, the opening of sight. Amalek begins here because Amalek, in Israel's memory, has always been an adversary who forces perception into strain. The encounter with Amalek is never neutral. It compels Israel to see, to reckon with what lies before them and what lies within them. The eye in Amalek is not passive vision. It is sight pulled taut against threat, requiring discernment at every turn. Without Ayin, there is no entry into the cycle at all, no capacity to register the encounter, no ground upon which the conflict even emerges. Amalek begins in sight because the confrontation always awakens a heightened awareness, and yet sight alone does not resolve what is seen. It opens the wound, but it does not close it. Then comes Mem, the waters in motion. Here is the turbulence, the flux, the instability that follows perception when the ground beneath one's feet refuses to stay still. Mem represents what we called chaos before, but it must be heard in its fullness. It is not only disorder, it is the pressurized condition in which seeing becomes unavoidable and incomplete. The encounter with Amalek exposes Israel to the waters, the shifting, destabilizing forces that refuse to be held in place. The threat does not announce itself as an orderly opponent to be neatly overcome. It pulls the people into currents they cannot control, into consequences they cannot entirely anticipate. And yet this motion, destabilizing as it is essential to the pattern. Without Mem, the cycle arrests itself in empty perception. There is no testing, no provocation, no tension to respond to. From there we turn to Lamd, the staff, the goad, the sign of instruction under pressure. Lame does not introduce ease into the cycle. It names what is forced from the encounter, the learning that must be extracted when perception collides with motion and demands guidance. This is the moment when the Simeonites, like their ancestors, are pressed to adapt, to respond, to find a path not yet walked. Lamed carries both pain and purpose. The sharp edge of the shepherd's staff, the sting that teaches the flock how to move. In Amalek, this is the place where pressure becomes pedagogy, where the instability of Mem opens into a chance for transformation if the lesson can be heard. The cycle both demands learning for resolution and sets the conditions under which learning becomes possible. Finally comes QOF, the back of the head, the mark of turning, the sign of recurrence. Here the loop closes, but it does not vanish. Quof returns us to where we began, to the eye, to perception strained anew, and the entire circuit spins again. This is what Amalek encodes. Sight awakened, pressure encountered, learning demanded, return inevitable. To misname Amalek as mere chaos is to miss this structure, to erase the precision with which the chronicler preserves the name. Amalek persists not because Israel failed to strike hard enough, but because what Amalek signifies cannot be struck away. It is a pattern, not an opponent, a cycle, not a singular threat. Seen this way, the Simeonites' confrontation with the remnant who had escaped of Amalek is not about the eradication of an enemy or the final resolution of an ancient grievance. It is about stepping directly into this fourfold circuit, touching a pattern that has already unfolded across generations and will unfold again. Only by carrying the full weight of the name can we make sense of the sentence's density. The Simeonites meet Amalek here, not as victors poised to erase history, but as participants drawn into a structure that will test sight, strain stability, demand instruction, and bring them, again and again, back to the beginning. Let us come back to the verse and hear it in full once more. And they struck down the remnant who had escaped of Amalek, and they dwelt there to this very day. We've begun by understanding Amalek's name and what it carries, the sense of a recurring pattern, the cycle of confrontation that has trailed Israel's story since the wilderness. But the chronicler does not start with Amalek directly. He begins with the action, and they struck down the remnant who had escaped of Amalek. Before we can understand what follows, we must attend to the careful shape of this first clause, where three forces intertwine: striking, remnant, and escape. These are not sequential notes in a straightforward narrative. They are interdependent movements whose tension cannot be reduced to victory or defeat. Taken together, they form their own cycle, and to mishear this is to misread the verse entirely. The first is the strike itself, the Simeonites' deliberate action. It represents more than violence in the abstract. It is an attempt to intervene, to halt, to sever the persistence of something unresolved. But a strike, however forceful, is never absolute. The blow always exceeds itself. There are unintended consequences, unseen reverberations, disruptions in memory that cannot be contained by the act itself. The Simeonites intend resolution. The strike delivers something far more complicated. That complexity emerges immediately in the second force, the remnant. By naming them, the chronicler acknowledges that survival endures beneath the blow. A remnant means that the past is not extinguished, that what was thought finished still lives on in fragmentary form. These survivors are not merely bodies that slipped away. They are the living evidence of incompletion, the residue of a story that refuses to stay sealed. The remnant guarantees that the encounter with Amalek remains open, that even decisive action leaves something unfinished behind. But the chronicler presses further still. This remnant is the remnant who had escaped. That final detail draws the third force into view, the escape that pushes the tension forward into the future. Escape does not just describe those who fled in this moment. It names the inevitability that something will get through, that the attempt to strike fully can never quite succeed. Whether outside in history, the Amalekite bloodline persisting, or inside the Simeonites themselves, the part that knows its own sin and refuses closure, the escape is constant. The blow lands, but not completely. There will always be a residue, always a return. This triad refuses resolution. Remove any one element and the structure collapses. Without the remnant, there is nothing to strike. Without the escape, there is no remnant. Without the striking, the unfinished tension never rises into view. Each movement feeds the others, and so the chronicler binds them tightly in a single phrase. What the Simeonites confront, then, is not simply people, but a pattern. The ongoingness of conflict, the certainty that survival and memory will outlast the act meant to suppress them. Seen this way, the opening half of the verse is not triumph, but exposure. The Simeonites step into an unfinished loop and meet the ones carrying it forward, only to discover that the act of striking cannot end the pattern but joins it. The name of Amalek preserves the cycle of sight, pressure, learning, and return. The triad of striking, remnant, and escape makes visible how that cycle lives on, not only historically, in flesh and blood survivors, but internally, wherever the attempt to close a wound awakens its persistence instead. The striking addresses not only bodies, but patterns. Only when this object is understood, the remnant that survives inside Amalek's long shadow, can we begin to hear what happens next when the Simeonites dwell there. Because there is not neutral ground. It is the place reshaped by this encounter, a landscape where survival, violence, and permanence meet. Let's return to the final clause of the verse. And they dwelt there to this very day. The pace of the verse slows on this final clause, but it does not resolve. It deepens. We are no longer inside the strike itself, but confronted with its aftermath, where three small words, dwelling, there to this day, form their own compact triad. On the surface, they describe settlement. In the structure of the passage, they name a condition. Dwelling is the first movement. To dwell is not to pass through, but to remain, to make ordinary life in a place where conflict has left its mark. The Simeonites choose not to withdraw from the site where residue and incompletion were exposed. They stay. Dwelling is the act that turns a single encounter into an ongoing state. But that state is not victory. It is entanglement. To dwell here is to live inside the very tension the strike failed to erase. The second movement is there. The chronicler does not name a city or landmark because there refers back to the ground shaped by the encounter itself. It is the place defined by unfinishedness, the site where striking did not close the loop, where the remnant and their escape revealed the persistence of Amalek's pattern. To say they dwelt there is to say they chose to inhabit the geography of confrontation, binding themselves to the space where recurrence had been exposed, and finally, to this very day. This phrase stretches the dwelling forward in time, but it does not guarantee literal permanence. It signals endurance. The state of remaining in that place persists so long as the Simeonites continue to choose it. The chronicler marks this moment as emblematic, not archaeological. To this day is less about proving that a household line survived unbroken than about showing that the act of staying became a living symbol of continuity. Read together, these three movements create a triad of their own. Dwelling there to this day functions not as a historical footnote but as an adverb of permanence, showing how the Simeonites' strike became more than an event. It became a posture, a way of living inside an unresolved cycle. But the permanence is conditional, dependent on human choice. To remain there is to continue inhabiting the same space where perception, pressure, and recurrence converge. The chronicler's phrasing asks us to hear this less as settlement accomplished and more as a lesson carried forward. Permanence is never absolute. It is chosen, sustained, and fragile. The full verse now comes into focus. And they struck down the remnant who had escaped of Amalek, and they dwelt there to this very day. At first glance, it reads like a simple chain of events. Strike, survive, settle. But by tracing its inner structures, we see that the chronicler has compressed into a single sentence the entire dynamic of recurrence and entanglement. Each movement, striking, escape, and dwelling, is distinct, but none stands alone. Together, they form a living pattern, and the name Amalek gathers the whole pattern into itself. We began by recovering what Amalek means. The name is not just a marker of an ancient people, but a circuit. Sight opened under strain, flux endured, learning pressed from pressure, recurrence inevitable. Amalek is the instability inside and around us, the confrontation with reality's unpredictability, and our own unresolved fractures. The Simeonites' encounter with Amalek is not a war story so much as an immersion in this recurring pattern. To strike Amalek is never just to defeat an opponent. It is to step into the cycle and make contact with instability itself. And so we come to the first state, striking Amalek. The Simeonites act deliberately. They confront the remnant. But striking, in the chronicler's economy, cannot resolve Amalek. The act itself creates residue. What was meant to end recurrence generates its next expression. Every strike produces something left unstruck, some surviving remnant, some memory that carries the pattern forward. To fight Amalek externally is to awaken Amalek internally, where the confrontation does not dissolve with the blade. The second state follows inevitably, escaping Amalek. The chronicler highlights that these survivors are the remnant who had escaped. Escape is not just historical about people who fled into the wilderness. It is structural. The moment we objectify instability and cast it outside ourselves, some part of it slips through, refuses containment, finds another form. This is why Amalek returns, because Amalek names the pattern itself, not its temporary carriers. The eye opens, the waters move, the staff presses, the cycle comes back again. We can try to exile instability into others, to label them Amalek, but what we repress escapes, and what escapes endures. And then the final state, dwelling in Amalek. The Simeonites remain there, inhabiting the ground, shaped by confrontation. To this very day, stretches the moment forward, not as proof of victory, but as witness that the cycle continues wherever we choose to live inside it. Dwelling in Amalek does not mean surrender. It means accepting that the conditions revealed by the encounter persist. The site of confrontation becomes the site of habitation, and permanence itself is conditional. To remain there is to remain within the same pattern, the same ongoing negotiation with perception, pressure, and recurrence. Seen this way, the verse is not about extermination, conquest, or stability. It is about participation in a structure, the choice to live inside a cycle that does not end by force. Striking Amalek, escaping Amalek, dwelling in Amalek. These are not three separate episodes, but three equivalent states, three positions within the same unresolved loop. The chronicler offers no path beyond it, only an image of what it means to remain inside. We fight instability outside ourselves, but Amalek escapes. We plant ourselves in the place where it confronted us, but Amalek lives to this very day. This is why the sentence carries so much weight in so few words. The Simeonites meet a pattern older than themselves, act upon it, and then inhabit its aftermath without undoing it. The lesson is not triumph, but recognition. Amalek cannot be destroyed because Amalek is not out there. It is the name for what happens whenever perception is strained, instability rises, learning is demanded, and the cycle turns again. The chronicler has captured this entire reality in a single haunting sentence, a reminder that what we fail to integrate, we recreate, and what we recreate, we eventually dwell within. Read together, verses 42 and 43 form a pattern that exposes the limits of preparation and the persistence of recurrence. Verse 42 builds a picture of control. A people deliberate in identity, precise in number, measured in force, harmonized in leadership, fitted to their terrain. Nothing here is chaotic. The Simeonites are not acting blindly. Their preparation suggests intention, purpose, and alignment. Everything in the verse gestures toward coherence, as though order, if perfectly assembled, could master history itself. But verse 43 interrupts that expectation. The strike falls, yet the cycle holds. Amalek does not vanish. There is a remnant, there is escape, there is return. The text names survival even as it describes violence, showing that what the Simeonites confront is not simply an enemy but a structure, a pattern older than their campaign and larger than their power to resolve. Their preparation cannot control it because the recurrence does not originate in them. What they meet in Amalek is something more enduring, a system of memory, reprisal, and persistence, one that exceeds the force directed against it. This is the lesson hidden beneath the event. Force cannot end recurrence, it perpetuates it. To strike at chaos is to take its shape, to step into its circuit, to join the energy one hopes to erase. The Simeonites act in order, but the act itself sustains disorder. Every blow creates a remnant. Every remnant ensures return. Violence fails not because it is insufficient, but because it answers the cycle on the cycle's terms. By treating the problem as an adversary to eliminate, they guarantee its continuity. And so they dwell there to this very day, believing they have secured stability, when in truth they have only planted themselves atop unresolved tension. The land becomes a monument to an unfinished conflict, continuity mistaken for closure. This is the danger encoded in the verse. To dwell on ground won by the strike is to inhabit the illusion that force can finish what it cannot. In reality, the strike does not end Amalek. It inscribes Amalek into memory, ensuring its name will never leave the story. The deeper way out lies elsewhere. Cycles end only when their elements are negated, when the terms that sustain them are withdrawn. The refusal of scapegoating, the refusal of domination, the refusal to imagine violence as resolution. But that is not what happens here. This story locks us inside the loop, showing how even perfect preparation, executed with precision, cannot dissolve the forces it tries to master. Amalek survives not despite the Simeonites' action, but because of it. Until the pattern itself is abandoned, its name persists, and so it does to this very day. This